The EU just admitted it has failed. Not in private, not behind closed doors, in public, in writing, in front of the entire world. Brussels called it a Plan B. But here's what it really is. It is a confession. A confession that one man, Viktor Orbán, has broken the European Union's most powerful financial weapon. And not just broken it, he made the EU build a completely different weapon just to replace the one he destroyed. 30 billion euros. Bilateral deals. An entirely new system built from scratch. All because Orbán sat still and did nothing. And while all of this was happening, a second bomb was ticking. 2,700 names on the EU sanctions list. Vladimir Putin, Sergei Lavrov, every major Russian oligarch. All of them. Every single one. Potentially wiped from the list automatically. Not because of a vote. Not because of a decision. Simply because the system failed and the deadline ran out. One country. One veto. And the entire EU sanctions architecture starts to collapse. This is not a political debate anymore. This is the story of how the European Union is destroying itself. And Viktor Orbán is not even breaking a sweat. Let's go through exactly what happened. Because the mainstream media is giving you the pieces. But they are not giving you the picture. It starts with the 90 billion euro loan package for Ukraine. The EU designed it as a joint instrument, all 27 countries together. One unified signal of European power. That was the plan. Orbán blocked it. Then Slovakia's Prime Minister Fico joined the blockade. And the EU suddenly found itself in an impossible situation. Its flagship financial commitment to Ukraine, the one it had announced to the world, the one it had promised Kyiv, was stuck, completely frozen, and the deadline was approaching fast. So Brussels came up with a workaround. They called it Plan B, and here's what it actually means. Instead of a unified EU decision, individual countries, the Baltic states, the Netherlands, the Nordic nations, would sign their own bilateral credit agreements directly with Kyiv. No central EU approval needed. No Commission vote required. No veto possible. The media presented this as a solution, as Brussels showing flexibility and strength, as Europe finding a way. But look at the numbers. The original plan was 90 billion euros as a united European bloc. Plan B delivers 30 billion euros. Bilateral. Fragmented. 1/3. From 90 billion to 30 billion. And they are calling this a win. Now ask yourself the most obvious question in the room. If 30 billion bilateral is the solution, why did we need the EU in the first place? If every country can just sign its own deal, what exactly is Brussels for? What is the Commission for? What is the entire architecture of European unity actually doing? That question has no good answer, because the answer is the one Brussels cannot say out loud. Orbán won, and rather than admit it, they are dismantling the system that proved his point. This is not Plan B. This is the beginning of the end of the EU as a unified actor. And here is what makes it even more damaging. The Netherlands has already committed 3.5 billion euros per year bilaterally, outside the EU framework entirely. That sounds substantial until you remember the original promise was 90 billion as a unified bloc. Now you have individual countries signing separate deals, pledging separate money, operating on separate timelines. No common voice, no common strategy, no common accountability. The gap between what was promised and what was delivered is not a rounding error. It is a collapse. 1/3 of the original commitment, delivered through back-channel agreements that barely make the front page, and the people who made that original promise, the same people who stood on stages and declared European unity, are now quietly signing bilateral paperwork in offices that the cameras never visit. This is what surrender looks like when it is dressed up as strategy. And Orbán did not even have to fire a shot. And now the second bomb. Because while everyone was focused on the loan, something far more dangerous was ticking in the background. The EU sanctions list. 2,700 names. Vladimir Putin, Sergei Lavrov, Russian oligarchs, defense industry executives, state media figures. Every major target in the EU's entire sanctions regime against Russia. All of it requiring unanimous renewal by the deadline of March 15th. Hungary and Slovakia were blocking the renewal. Think about what that means. Not just a delayed payment to Ukraine, not just a political standoff. The complete, automatic, unilateral removal of 2,700 sanctions targets from the EU's enforcement list. Putin walks free from EU sanctions. Lavrov walks free. Every name on that list. Automatically cleared. Not because anyone decided to clear them, but because the EU system simply could not agree in time. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said publicly that a failure on the sanctions would be, and I am paraphrasing here, a setback and a signal Europe did not want to send. She sees the problem. She understands the stakes. But she cannot fix it. Because the EU structure gives her no tools. She can warn. She can call it a setback. but she cannot move Orbán. She cannot override the veto. She cannot make the system work if the system is broken. And that is the most revealing part of this entire story. The EU's top diplomat standing in front of Europe and saying, I see the disaster coming, and I cannot stop it. That is not strength. That is paralysis wearing a suit. Here's where the picture becomes completely clear. The same blockade, a single veto from a single country, is hitting two targets at the same time, the 90 billion loan, and the two 700 named sanctions list. With one move, Orbán is draining the EU's financial weapon and its enforcement weapon simultaneously. He does not even need a strategy. He just has to sit still, and the EU system destroys itself around him. And now Zelensky has confirmed it himself. In an interview, the Ukrainian president said, "We need a plan B." He attacked Orbán directly. He said Hungary is blocking everything: financial support, weapons, the EU accession process, all of it. That sounds like a man applying pressure. But look at the math behind those words. Ukraine, after the IMF disbursement of $8.1 billion, had money to last until early May. The first credit payment deadline was April 1st. That payment was not coming because the system was blocked. 50 days of runway. And for those 50 days, the European Union was tearing itself apart. For 50 days, Europe abandoned its foundational unity principle. For 50 days, sanctions against Putin were at risk of expiring. For 50 days, bilateral deals were being stitched together in backrooms to replace a system that had publicly failed. And at the center of all of it, a prime minister from a country of 10 million people, sitting in Budapest, doing nothing, and winning. Now let's talk about what this means for Germany, because this is where it becomes personal. Germany has already paid 94 billion euros bilaterally to Ukraine, more than any other European country, more than anyone. When the EU's unified mechanisms collapse and bilateral deals take over, the pressure lands hardest on the biggest economies. That means Germany pays more and gets less say. More money out. Less influence in. That is the calculation coming directly at Berlin right now. And the pressure is not hypothetical. It is mathematical. When you remove the shared burden of 27 countries acting together and replace it with individual bilateral agreements, the countries with the largest economies absorb the largest share of the gap. Germany is the biggest net contributor to the EU. Germany is the biggest bilateral donor to Ukraine. Germany is at the center of every financial decision Brussels makes. And now the system that was supposed to distribute that weight is fracturing. Every bilateral deal signed by a smaller country represents a gap that Germany will eventually be asked to fill. 700 million euros in interest per year. That is Germany's projected annual cost on its share of the 90 billion package alone. That is not foreign policy. That is schools not built, bridges not repaired, infrastructure not funded, hospitals not staffed, money leaving Germany and not coming back. And the German government said nothing. No statement on Plan B. No public position on the March 15th sanctions deadline. Silence. While the EU architecture that Germany helped build is being dismantled piece by piece. Now step back and look at the full picture. Because this is what mainstream media never does. They give you the individual stories. The loan story, the sanction story, the Plan B story. But they never put them in the same frame at the same time. Here is the frame. The EU has been promising since 2022 to fix the veto problem in its foreign policy architecture. 4 years. Zero structural progress. Instead, workarounds. Article 122, enhanced cooperation mechanisms. And now bilateral deals. Every single workaround moves further from the principle of European unity. Every single one validates exactly what Orbán has been saying. That the EU cannot function as a unified bloc when a single member disagrees. That the system is structurally broken at its core. And instead of fixing it, Brussels dismantles it to go around him. That is not reform. That is retreat. And every step of the retreat proves that Orbán was right. There's one more thing you need to understand about Plan B. It is not just a financial workaround. It is a precedent. And precedents in European politics do not disappear. They become the new normal. If bilateral deals work for Ukraine today, they work for the next issue tomorrow. If individual countries can bypass the Commission on credit agreements, they can bypass the Commission on sanctions, on energy, on defense. The 27-nation unity that gave the EU its leverage against Russia, against anyone, starts to fragment. Not because Orbán demanded it, because Brussels chose it over admitting that one man stopped the machine. That is the real story, not Orbán blocking the EU choosing self-destruction over defeat. And the most extraordinary part of all of this, even EU insiders know it. Diplomats were quoted saying the entire expansion strategy behind these moves is dead on arrival. One official told the Kiev Post directly, "We have been raising false hopes." They know the plan is failing. They know the workarounds are not working. They know Orbán has not moved. And they are still running the same play. Freeze his funding, threaten his voting rights, plan for his electoral defeat. build financial pressure until he breaks. He has not broken. He has not moved. He has not changed his position by a single degree. And every week that goes by, the EU loses more ground, more credibility, more structural integrity, all to avoid saying 3 words. Orbán was right. Now, ask yourself the question that nobody in the mainstream media is asking. If this is what Brussels does to a country of 10 million people who simply uses the legal right it was given under EU treaty law, what happens when Germany says no? What happens when a future German government decides not to fund the next Ukraine package? What happens when France blocks the next expansion vote? The answer is already written. Freeze the funding. Build a workaround. Plan B, Plan C, bilateral deals. And if that does not work, threaten voting rights. Find a way to override the vote of a democratically elected government because it produced the wrong result. That is not the EU that was promised to European citizens. That is something different, something that has no name yet. But it is being built right now, in real time, in Brussels. Funded with your money, and nobody asked you. Viktor Orbán did not destroy the European Union. He sat still, and the EU destroyed itself trying to move him. That is the story. And only one channel is telling you all of it at once. Subscribe. Hit the like button, because the next move is already coming. And when it does, you will see it here first.